right, thank you guys. All right, so I'm going to talk about mental wellness from the perspective of an athlete, right? What if what happens in your gut could give you a mental edge, right? And this applies for athletes, applies to non-athletes. I love what Nike used to say 30 years ago when the company started, that if you have a body, you are an athlete, right? And so what I usually talk about is this area of psychology research that I've specialized in for the last 20 years called psychological vigor. Vigor in psychology research is the opposite state of burnout. Nobody wants to be burned out, everybody wants to be vigorous. Vigor, to define it, is a combination of 3 mood states. It's physical energy, mental acuity, and emotional well-being, all wrapped up into one thing. And so the kind of work that I do, here, let me show you this. Here's all the gobbledygook about me. These 2 websites down here have a ton of really good information. So Amare.com and my website, ShawnTalbott.com. The slides that I'm using right now are already posted there at ShawnTalbott.com. So if you want to download them and use them and refer back to them and things to people at whatever level that you can. The kind of work that I do, my PhD is in nutritional biochemistry. So a lot of my work is looking at what is your microbiome doing? What is your neurotransmitters doing? What is your level of inflammation doing? What is your stress hormones doing? All that kind of stuff. But then, how does all of that biochemistry translate into psychology? How do the stress hormones relate to your level of resilience? How do the neurotransmitters relate to your level of focus or drive or motivation or mood? That kind of stuff. So that's the perspective that I'm going to try to give tonight. What I'm not going to do is give a sort of a standard nutrition lecture. Sometimes when I speak to athletes, they think that what I'm going to talk about is how many carbohydrates should I eat and how many grams of protein and that kind of stuff, which I do sometimes. On my website, on that same website, I have a talk that's called 12 Fitness Tips from the World's Fittest CEO. A few years ago, I won this competition for C-level executives, where you go for 3 days. This one was in Virginia. The one that I won was in Vermont, where you're competing against people in trail running and bike riding and climbing over walls and things like that. And it came down to the last little couple of seconds, and I was able to just squeak out. So I get to be the fittest CEO. But in this talk, that's posted at my website, ShawnTalbott.com, I do go through that kind of stuff. I give the 12 tips about what your psychology should look like, what your nutrition should look like, what your recovery should look like, that kind of stuff. So if you want that kind of info, go there and listen to it. It's an hour-long lecture. But tonight what I want to really talk about is this idea of what's happening in your gut is really driving where you are on what I call the mental wellness continuum. And this applies for everybody. It applies for everyone, whether you're an athlete or not. Every single person in here right now is somewhere on this mental wellness continuum. You might be at the low end, you might be in the medium, the sort of middle side of it, you might be at the optimized zone. And this is where I really started my career. After I got my PhD, I did a lot of work in sports nutrition. So I would speak at all the Olympic training centers, typically about vigor or about recovery or about stress metabolism or something like that. I did work, I was on the performance enhancement team for US Ski, for US Track and Field Association, and it was always along the idea of getting the athletes to balance their stress and their recovery. Because if you don't do that, you get sick. If you don't do that, you get hurt. If you don't do that, you're going to get burned out, and then you're not going to be at the top step of the podium, right? And what we know things now that we didn't know then. We knew a lot about stress hormones then. We knew a lot about neurotransmitters. We knew a lot about inflammation 20 years ago. But now the real game changer is around this thing called the microbiome. How many people have heard of that before? Oh, this is great, awesome. So I'll be able to go into some real weeds with you guys then, because so many people put their hands up. Microbiome is the 100 trillion cells that are in your gut, and in large part, they determine where we are on this mental wellness continuum. We know that we know enough about it now where we can modulate it pretty specifically to take somebody out of depression and make them feel normal again. We know enough about it now where we can take somebody out of sort of daytime fatigue and irritability and make them feel amazing. And we know enough about it where if we're up here in this sort of optimized zone, where these elite level athletes might be, we can take them from a 9.5 to a 9.6, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that is meaningful. That can be the difference between being on the top step of the podium and not even being qualified for the finals, right? Because the differences are so slight. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight. And it's, as I get into the weeds of this, right? If it gets to be a little bit too esoteric, all you have to remember is this. It literally comes down to being as simple as these 3 bullet points. How you feel is not just in your head, it's also in your gut. Our second brain includes the microbiome and plays a major role in mental wellness. And you can now do something naturally to improve your mental wellness. And that could be as easy as eating the right kinds of foods, the right kinds of fibers, avoiding the wrong kinds of foods. It could be supplementing strategically with the right kinds of bacteria or the right kinds of prebiotics. There's all kinds of things that we can do. How many people have heard of that before? The second brain? Probably a lot of you, because not as many people as put up the microbiome hand, right? One more time. How many people know second brain? Okay. How many people have never heard of second brain before? You're probably thinking what a lot of people think. You probably know someone who doesn't have one brain. But that second brain, imagine, when I was explaining the microbiome to a group of non-scientists, non-athletes, just sort of regular everyday people. And the guy in the front, as I was explaining it, he goes, because what I was talking about is how the microbiome can make 90-95% of your serotonin comes from your gut. That's the neurotransmitter, sort of being happy or sad. 70% of your dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter of motivation. Most of your norepinephrine, which is focus. Most of your GABA, which is the ability to relax. And as I was describing that, he kind of said it to himself, but he was in the front row, so I heard him. He goes, it's like having an internal pharmacy. And I stopped him, and I stopped the presentation, like, could you say that again? And he said it again. I was like, that's exactly what it's like. So how many people here would consider themselves to be athletes? Okay, well, good. More hands should go up, right? Because what I said before, if you have a body, you're an athlete. Imagine if you had a brand new organ, newly discovered 5 years ago in your body, that we could actually go in and modulate at will to produce performance-enhancing molecules. Like, that to me is like, but that's the kind of stuff that we can do. We know that we can change the microbiome to change all these aspects of the integrity. Is going to mean we digest better and we absorb our nutrients better, right? If we have a better gut, like a non-leaky gut, a gut with good integrity, non-permeable gut, it's going to digest better, we're going to absorb nutrients at a higher rate, and people with leaky gut will sometimes be deficient in certain nutrients because their gut is wounded and it can't absorb at the level that we want it to. So that's one of the most basic ones, right? We just have to have a non-damaged gut so we can do what we're supposed to do in terms of nutrition. This one, GI discomfort or distress, in the kind of the competitions that I do, ultramarathons and Ironmans and things like that, Ironman athlete right there. What's the #1 reason people drop out of Ironmans? You probably know. I don't know if maybe you've experienced this before. Sorry to put you on the spot. Nutrition failure. And sometimes it's because you can't absorb and you get squished gut, right? All that stuff is just going back and forth and you can't get it out of your gut into your systemic circulation. Your gut is shut down. Sometimes it's just nausea, right? I don't know how many times my poor wife has been at a tent in the middle of the night at a 100-mile trail race watching me throw up all over the place, right? Well, not just me, 100 other people, because 80% of the people are dropping out of those things because of GI distress, right? So if you can get a better gut, less inflamed, less leaky, better able to absorb things so you can get things out of the gut into your bloodstream, that's going to be good. This is one that doesn't connect with a lot of people. When I worked with the US ski team, the #1 problem with the team right before the 2002 Winter Olympics was that they were all getting sick, right? And getting hurt on their World Cup, and they didn't want to do that before the big games come. And so what we did is we looked at gut things before we could even measure the microbiome, but we were really trying to modulate immune system function. So part of that is that if you can do that, you're less likely to catch a cold, an upper respiratory tract infection. If you can modulate it the right way through the microbiome, you can make sure that you don't have allergies, that you don't have that your immune system, if it's robust, it can go in there and help heal that damage that is the source of how we respond to our training. Inflammation and recovery is hugely governed by the gut. And the reason for that is that the microbiome governs a lot of, not just immune system function, but systemic inflammation. So if there's things we can do to lower inflammation directly and help athletes recover after a hard workout. The workout's going to induce inflammation in your body. You want to get that down to a manageable level so your tissues can build back stronger and faster and all that kind of stuff. But your microbiome controls a lot of that. And if your microbiome is in a good balance point, you're able to get the inflammation under control, which allows your immune system to do what it's supposed to do, which means that you can recover faster. So I'm going to go through this kind of stuff in a little more detail. I want to give you an overview here. Metabolism is huge. I'll show you how we measure this from a microbiome perspective in a little bit, but these are all things that are really important for athletes. Thyroid function for overall metabolism, blood glucose control, cortisol control, primary stress hormone. All of these are modulated in large part by what's happening in the gut, and we'll talk about how we measure that in a little bit. And then looking at ones that are more sort of directly related to actual performance. If you can get somebody to focus better on their workout, if you can engage them better so that their motions are better, or so they know when to push and when to back off in a particular competition. If you can get an athlete into flow state or into what some athletes would call the zone, we can do that through modulating the microbiome, because so much of the neurotransmitter effect is coming from here, right? There's still things we're going to be doing in the brain, but if we think of this from the perspective of two brains, why wouldn't you, if you were able to modulate that second brain in a positive direction, why wouldn't you? Especially if you're looking for that little bit of a psychological or performance advantage. And then this one, what's the difference between somebody choking or being that clutch player? Right? Being able to rise to the occasion of stress when you're under that stressful situation, the last out of the ninth inning, that kind of thing, or the last jump in the competition, or whatever the case may be. Some people choke and some people rise to that occasion. Some of that is related to stress resilience. Some of that is related to focus. Some of that is related to your ability to take in that information and digest it and act upon it. And a lot of that comes from the second brain. So we're going to go through some of that as we go through there. So we already know that there are differences between athletes and exercisers and couch potatoes in terms of what your microbiome looks like. And from a this looks like a lot of gobbledygook, but from a pattern perspective, it's pretty easy to see. I could have 3 microbiome tracings, and I could say, yep, that's the couch, with reasonable accuracy. That's the couch potato, that's the weekend warrior, that's the elite level athlete, right? Because of signatures, right? Everybody in here has their own unique microbiome. It's almost like a fingerprint, right? So when I say that, sometimes people go, well, if we're all so unique, how can taking probiotics, or how can eating certain fibers, how can that be good for everybody, right? It's because of the similarities in patterns, right? Once we get everybody out of the wrong pattern, which is generally too many bad bacteria and not enough good bacteria, and we get you back into the right pattern, the right level of good bacteria high, the right level of bad bacteria, which is low, but not zero, that pattern is going to be good for everybody, and then we can fine-tune and tweak from there, okay? But everybody needs to establish that normal pattern. And what I mean by that is that there are good studies to show that one of the key signatures that we know that athletes dominate non-athletes is in production of these compounds called short-chain fatty acids. So here you can see the gray bars. Athletes across the board just have more of these different kinds of short-chain fatty acids. So we can look at the compounds that the microbiome is producing. We can also look at the bacteria that are producing those compounds. And so we can look at something like this, and we can look at different levels of athletes. And we can see, here's when we grade them based on the specific bacteria, the specific bugs. So there's this idea in pharmaceutical research when we're looking at microbiome, that the bugs could be the drugs, right? We're changing the level of the bacteria, and that's inducing some sort of a physiological effect, as if we gave somebody a drug. There's also the idea of getting the drugs from the bugs. So this one would be the drugs from the bugs. This is something, short-chain fatty acids, that your bacteria are producing that are anti-inflammatory, that are good for your overall metabolism, that are going to be good for your immune system, that are going to reduce leaky gut, that are going to reduce inflammation in the gut and throughout the entire body. Really, really good to have a lot of short-chain fatty acids. So we can give you short-chain fatty acids, right? We have supplements that actually have short-chain fatty acids in them, and you can take them in a capsule, and you can swallow them, and you can get delivered more short-chain fatty acids, and that's going to be a good thing, right? That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is actually growing more of the bacteria that give you those short-chain fatty acids. So, that's the internal pharmacy idea. And so here are all these different athletes. You guys might know some of these people. Alex Honnold. Anybody see the Free Solo movie? Did it freak you out? I sat there wiping my hands the whole time because I was like sweating just watching. He has a really, really high level of these bacteria called Prevotella. Prevotella come from fiber, right? So he's probably 95% vegetarian with his diet, and so you can see that reflected in his microbiome. Rob Krar, one of the top ultra runners out there. Rob, so when I did Leadville 100, excuse me, is this water for me? Thank you. When I did Leadville 100 a couple of years ago, Rob won it that year, and he had already gone out to the 50-mile turnaround point and was coming back and passed me as I was still going out. I think I was still at mile 30, and he was already out to 50 and back and moving like I've never moved, ever. And he already had 60 miles under his belt. But you look at him, and he's sort of I don't think he's vegan, but he eats lots of fruits and vegetables and lots of grains. That's reflected here in his microbiome. And then Amelia Boone, she's one of the top mud racers, like Spartan races and Tough Mudder kinds of races. She's always eating mud and eating soil. And this, you see this light blue, hardly anybody else has a lot of this light blue. These are soil-specific bacteria, right? So she's ingesting that mud, and it's being reflected in her microbiome. So you can see those kinds of things, across the level, and you can see that they're all a little bit different. But what they share are some similar patterns, right? If you went through all of this and said, oh, what are they particularly high in? You can see lots of them are high in that blue, Prevotella. They're eating a lot of fiber. They're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. They're eating a lot of oatmeal. They're eating a lot of that kind of stuff. That's the kind of food that feeds the kind of bacteria that we want. Those particular bacteria, those Prevotellas, are going to produce a lot of those short-chain fatty acids so that we're going to be able to recover and bounce back and have low inflammation. And it's good for our immune system and all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Do you guys know how we measure the microbiome? Anyone? Poop, yeah, it's a poop sample, right? And a lot of times people will say, oh, how do I get mine measured? How do I get mine measured? And I'll say, well, we can do that. Here, hold on a second. And I give them a little envelope with some tubes in it, little tiny tubes, and they're like, yeah, what do I, do I put blood? No, not blood, no. Do I spit in it? No, I'm like, the bathrooms are right back there. I go back and toilet paper, a little bit of swab in there, and they're like, they make that face right there. And then they're handing back the envelope, they're like, not interested. But that's how we measure it. And one of the really cool things about that is that 5 years ago, we could measure it, but it was really difficult. It took a long time, it was really expensive. Now, we measure it all the time. It takes about an afternoon to measure somebody's microbiome. And we get millions of data points, but people ask me sometimes, why are we hearing so much about the microbiome now and we didn't hear about it 10 years ago? We couldn't measure it 10 years ago the way we can measure it now. And so now, because we can measure it, we can not only get this kind of stuff where we can see, but now we can go in and very precisely modulate it or manipulate it and be able to say to someone, you look like you're a little bit low in this. If we could amp that up, you're going to be less inflamed. If we can amp that up, your immune system's going to be stronger. If we can amp that up, your mood is going to be better, or your stress resilience, or your motivation, or, I mean, it really gets, we can get into the nitty-gritty of going in there and modulating that. And that's super cool because there aren't a lot of aspects of physiology or biochemistry that are that modulatable, if that's a word. Yeah, I don't know if that's a word or not. But it gives us a lot of really cool things that we can do. Okay, and one of the reasons that that's important is because like this, which our company is 100% focused on mental wellness, is an epidemic right now. So athletes are people too. Athletes suffer from these same sorts of things. Depression and anxiety and stress and burnout at epidemic levels. So much so, I'll go through some of the other statistics here, that one of the things that I love about what's happening now in our culture is that people like Michael Phelps and Kevin Love, and I mean, you name it, elite level athletes are coming out and talking about their challenges with mental wellness, right? And saying, hey, Michael Phelps, for example, was so depressed after the last Olympics, winningest gold medalist of all time, wanted to kill himself, right? That's not a good situation, right? So there's a performance aspect to what we're talking about here, and there's just a living your life at the best level aspect that we're talking about here too. Okay, so one of the reasons for this, I think, is the continuum of stress. This is really what I've spent a lot of my scientific career on. How many people in here have stress? Just very good. Probably 100% of the hands are going to go up. Stress isn't all bad. Acute stress is actually good for us, right? It's good for our neurons. Exercise stress is a stress. It's good for our muscles. It's good for our bones. A little bit of stress is good for our immune systems, etc., etc. We can adapt to that wonderfully well. But chronic stress, we don't adapt to. Chronic stress, the kind of stress that comes and sits and doesn't go away and isn't rhythmic and isn't sort of pulsatile, that we don't deal very well with. It becomes catabolic in the body. So when we study stress, I love studying stress because there are a lot of levers that you can manipulate to see changes in somebody biochemically or physiologically. So we can have exercise stress, we can have a sleep stress, we can have a dietary stress, we can have psychological stress, we can have all kinds of different stressors, and we can see how it impacts on your hormone system, or your nervous system, or your immune system, and how those systems result in different kinds of symptoms, so to speak. How do the changes result in depression, or help you feel better? How do the changes change your susceptibility to infections or allergies or something like that, or how can we prevent that? So it's really, really fun to study, but it is frustrating if you're in any of these situations where you're out of balance in any of those ones. Because what ends up happening is an imbalance here leads to an imbalance there and leads to an imbalance there. And if you come at this with sort of blinders on and say the problem is just your thyroid hormone, you will change how somebody feels or change how they perform a little bit. You're not going to change it on the grand scale that you need to because you haven't addressed all the other things. Does that make sense to everybody? It's this idea of this is a multifactorial problem, and it needs a multifactorial intervention. And that's why I like lifestyle. That's why I like natural therapies, because they very often, in and of themselves, an herb or a diet or an exercise regimen or a meditation program, each one of those is multifactorial because of how it affects your biochemistry. Okay, so what we're always trying to do, this is a very famous concept in stress research, the Yerkes-Dodson curve. What you're trying to do, excuse me, is reach this point of optimal performance by balancing stress and recovery, or intensity and low intensity. That idea. And when you sort of hit that tipping point, you start to break down. You start to break down psychologically, you start to break down physically. The difference between stress and burnout. And so when we teach this to students, we very often will use the analogy of, if we're talking about a stress response, we want you to think of yourself as the zebra, and your stress is a lion, right? Here's an acute stress response that all mammals do very well with. Lion comes charging at you from out of the bushes. You, the zebra, mount a stress response. You have your fight or flight reaction, all the hormones, all the physiology, and then the stress hormones dissipate. This whole circle is maybe 60 seconds long, right? Whether you get away from the lion or not, it's only 60 seconds, right? And your stress response is over. Hopefully you got away, and this is why, because it's only 60 seconds, and then you're calm for a while until the next lion, and then it's only 60 seconds, and then you're calm for a while until the next lion. We do great with that. And that this book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, is that idea that all mammals do great with intermittent stress. In fact, we need it in order to thrive. Has anybody ever read this book before? It's a fantastic stress physiology book. It's written by Robert Sapolsky, who's at Stanford. If you're having trouble picking him out, he's the one on the left. He's a brilliant scientist. He's sort of the father of modern stress physiology. He's spent the last 40 or so years in Africa studying baboon social hierarchy, right, on his summers from Stanford. And he's really taught us a lot about what causes us to be stressed out, using baboons as that model. Who do you think are the most stressed out baboons? The alphas at the top, who have all the responsibility? No, you shook your head immediately. No. The guys at the bottom, who are getting dumped on all the time? No. It's the middle ones, right? It's the moms of the baboon world, basically. It's anybody who's sort of the middle managers who are taking it from the top and have responsibilities that never go away, right? They have the same exact problem. They have more parasites. They have lower immune system function. They have more abdominal obesity. They have more neuronal problems. They have the baboon version of depression. They don't go through the drive-thru as much as we might when we're depressed, but like the same sorts of things, like they're not as social and they're not as outgoing and that kind of stuff. So that tells us that the psychology can change the biochemistry and vice versa. This is how a human response looks like, right? It's the difference is that it's not acute, it's chronic, because our sources of stress come from bills and deadlines and finances and relationships and things that never quite go away. Right? They're always sort of there. So we're always mounting a stress response. And very dramatically, I have a tombstone here that stress is killing us. And it is, because it causes us to be catabolic throughout the entire body. And what that looks like when we look at it at a tissue level, so we can look at it at the tissue level, we can look at it at the bacterial level, we can look at it sort of in between at the signal level, the biochemistry level. This is neurons. And the reason I show you neurons is because they're a very visual cell. You don't have to be a neurologist to see that this one, normal stress, normal cortisol, good recovery, looks healthier, right? It's bigger, it has more projections. The projections that are there just look healthy compared to this one, which just looks sick. It's shrunken, it's shriveled. It's not as thick. The neuronal body is not as robust. There's broken projections here. So this just doesn't look good. It has a functional impairment a long time before it gets to the physical destruction. So it's not going to be good with memory. It's not going to be good with clarity and cognition and focus and all that kind of stuff. So this happens in every single tissue in the body in response to that chronic stress. So let's put it in athlete terms again, right? You put yourself under stress, like a CrossFit workout or a long run or whatever it is, and you don't recover enough, and then you use more stress and you don't recover enough, more stress, you don't recover enough, pretty soon you're going to break. And it might be the tissue that's becoming catabolic, might be your muscles, it might be your skin, it might be your bones, it might be your immune system, it might be your brain, it might be any tissue in your body. Every single tissue becomes catabolic and breaks down faster than it can build back up again in response to being out of balance that way. Except for one. There's one tissue that responds oppositely. It becomes anabolic and builds up in response to that situation. Does anyone know what it is?
That's it.
Not the heart. Heart breaks down too. The heart, just like any muscle, becomes catabolic. And this is one of the things that's frustrating with a type A sort of athlete, right? The athletes that are up there in that sort of 9 to 10 range, when their performance starts to slide, what do? They go harder. Yeah, I gotta amp it up. I gotta buckle down here, right? and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Here's the tissue that builds up, your abdominal fat, specifically belly fat. And so, you know, when I used to go to the Olympic training centers, we would look at this. We'd measure cortisol, stress hormone, and we would measure belly fats. We'd measure sleep cycles, we'd measure all sorts of things. But you could see it was a signal if an athlete was getting tired and was trying to go harder, and they gained, I mean, literally like another 1%, and it came around their midsection. That doesn't sound like a lot, right? 1% to most of us. But if you're an elite level, Olympic level athlete, and you've got 1%, that is catastrophic a lot of times both for your physical and for your psychological. But what you see here is high stress, high cortisol, normal stress, normal cortisol. And the intra-abdominal fat, the visceral fat's been colorized so you can see it better. Not a lot here, a lot here. And I mean, this is bad. Nobody wants to have their fat located there. But this is metabolically toxic fat. It's going to be associated with high blood pressure and high cholesterol and diabetes and all those sorts of things later on in life. So nobody wants to have that sort of thing. And unfortunately, this is what our cortisol levels end up looking like. This is what they should look like, right? Cortisol, just like stress is not a bad thing necessarily, it's when the dose is too much and too consistent. Same thing with cortisol. We want a little bit of cortisol. This is what wakes us up in the morning. This is what gets us ready to face the stress of the day. But then it should dissipate slowly throughout the day, reaching its lowest point at night when we're most relaxed, when we're most recovered, when we're in our deep stages of sleep. Unfortunately, this is what cortisol levels tend to look like for most people, right? All these emergencies that happen throughout the day, including your workout, is going to increase your cortisol levels, at least temporarily. And so the difference between, the space between the red line and the blue line, that space in between, that's cortisol overexposure. And the more you have that, the more often you have that, the more predominant that is, the more you're going to become catabolic, except for your belly fat, you're going to become anabolic. Okay? That same thing, I should have said, also disrupts the microbiome as a tissue in the body. So all of that has been sort of, we've known a lot of that along the way. What's really changed over the last couple of years is this, that the brain isn't the only target that we have anymore. We used to think that if an athlete or anybody was depressed or burned out or couldn't focus or was sad or any of those kinds of things, we used to think that the problem was in the brain, right? And that actually was perfectly logical given the tools that we had at the time scientifically. But now what and that's kind of why we have this whole class of drugs called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, like Prozac-style drugs, and all the ones that have come from that strategy. But what we realize now is that it's not just the brain problem. Like I said earlier, the brain is still important, and there's still things we can do directly to the brain to make it work better and function better and be more resilient. But we need to look at the second brain first, right? That idea of the second brain and the microbiome, it really is, in a lot of ways, fundamentally changing how we think about mental performance and physical performance. So much so, I should have talked about this before, the last Olympics, we really were concerned there was going to be a wave of poop doping happening among the athletes, right? So think about it. There's pretty good tests for testosterone and EPO and stimulants and steroids and things like that, growth hormones. And so athletes are moving away from those kinds of things. What if you could dope your microbiome so that now you're producing bacteria, like I showed you on that athlete panel, that are better able to metabolize carbohydrates, maybe to be better at endurance? What if we could change your microbiome so that you were better able to metabolize lactic acid? Those middle distance sprinters now would be able to go further, faster, before they started to tie up. What if you could change what's happening in the microbiome to produce compounds that are going to signal your muscle cells to make more protein, muscle protein synthesis, right? Then a power athlete could maybe put on more mass before the weightlifting competition, right? Does that sound like science fiction to you guys? It's not. It's not at all. There are companies that are actually trying to manipulate some of this kind of stuff. And I think we'll see it in the next Olympics. I think people will try to do this. There's at least a couple of cases that I'll allude to in just a little bit, but it's fundamentally changing how we think about all this kind of stuff. And so when we think about how sort of massive the microbiome is, if we were meant to measure all the cells, right, 100 trillion bacterial cells, and compare it to the human cells that you have in your body, we are 90% bacteria. Right? There's about 100 trillion bacterial cells, and there's about 10 trillion human cells. So a cell-to-cell basis, what's sitting in your chair right now is 90% bacteria. You're just a big bag of bacteria, right? I mean, gross. I can see people sort of making that face. If we think about it on a genetic basis, our bacterial genes actually outnumber our human genes by a factor of 1,000. So we're 99.9 something percent bacterial genes. And the reason that that's particularly exciting is that we know that these bacterial genes in the microbiome modulate which of our human genes are turned on and turned off, which genes are expressed. And that's exciting because there's a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are looking at that and saying, if I can develop a drug that changes what happens in the microbiome, changes the signals that come out, I could turn off the gene for Alzheimer's. I could turn off the gene for Parkinson's, or for MS, or the family of genes related to autism, right? That's the kind of work that's getting done right now. And the thing that which also sounds like science fiction, but the data is there. Mostly in rodents at this point, but it's still there. The thing that gets me excited as a nutritionist is that I know that we can use exercise to change the microbiome. We can use food to change the microbiome. We can use supplements to change the microbiome. If you have somebody who has a different sleep pattern, their microbiome is different, right? So there's a lot of natural lifestyle therapies that we can use in a very targeted way to get the same sorts of changes. Okay, and then I said earlier that it can get complicated very, very quickly, right? I mean, complicated enough where sometimes people just go, well, forget it, I'm just going to eat donuts, right? Because this just seems like too many moving parts, right? But it really, really is as easy as this. If you can get everything in balance, you're going to feel good. And if you're out of balance in any of those different ways, not enough short-chain fatty acids, not enough serotonin, too many inflammatory signals, you might feel bad in a variety of different ways. And we're just now getting to the point where we can say, aha, these are your symptoms. This is what we think we need to do. Let's see how you do. Okay, you got this much better. Now let's go and we'll do this other thing, right? And sometimes it's as simple as, if there's one thing you guys need to do when you get out of here, what do you think is the most important thing that you can do to improve your microbiome status tonight? Sleep's pretty good. I would say it's in the top 5, but it's not number 1. Not drink water. Water's important. Not necessarily for the microbiome, but important in general. Cut sugar is one side of it. Not fast. Fasting is good for your microbiome. I'll talk about that in just a little minute. Oral health. Vegetables. Oral health is really important.
Not wash your hands.
Yeah, go roll in the dirt. Come on, you guys know this.
Eat as wide variety of vegetables.
Wide variety of vegetables you can. Get more fiber is the number one thing that you can do. Most of us get around, how many servings of fruits and vegetables do you think is the average in the United States right now?
4.
It's 1.2, right? And 1 point, that's abysmal. We're supposed to get 5 to 10, and most of us don't get even close. How many people do get 5 to 10? So good. Keep doing that. That's really, really important. You're still not as good as you need to be. So most of us get 1.2. The number one fruit is what?
Apples.
Apples, good. Not bad. What's the number one vegetable? Potatoes. How are they prepared? French fries. French fries are our number one vegetable in the United States. How sad is that? So if most people are getting 1.2, we're supposed to be getting 5 to 10. That's giving us around 30 grams of fiber, which is still a little bit below the recommendation. We should be getting around 38, 40 or so. But if you look at a hunter-gatherer culture, like an African tribe, they'll be getting 100, 120, 150 grams of fiber. So even if we're getting the 30 or 40 that's recommended, we're not even touching where we're probably supposed to be. So eat more fiber. That was a total aside that I didn't mean to go down. But there's lots of things that we can do that are really, really simple. Less processed foods, more fiber is probably the simplest that most people can do. And when we do that, we change what grows here in the gut, we change what signals come out, and we change what signals go up to the brain. And those signals go through a whole vast network, a very redundant network, communication network. Some of the signals go through your nervous system, some of the signals go through your immune system, some go through your neurotransmitters, some go through hormones, some go through cytokines, which is sort of what regulates your inflammation. So there's a lot of signaling going back and forth there. I want to give you a perspective for how changeable we think this is, right? So if you do eat more fiber, what can you reasonably expect? Here's some data from rodent research. And rodents are a really good way for us to test a theory, right? A lot of what I just said is kind of theoretical, but we can use it as a model system to see, does this wacky idea actually work? So we can take an obese mouse, and we can take their microbiome, and we can inoculate it into a lean mouse. That lean mouse will now become obese, right? Its metabolism changes, its thyroid levels change, its glucose levels change, its stress hormone levels change, its appetite changes, its whole behavior around food changes, right? So it's not just it's not just a metabolic change. It also is now looking for food more hours of the day. It's when it finds food, it hides the food from its litter mates. It doesn't go on the wheel, right? It goes and watches TV or whatever it's able to do. It does all the things that will drive it to obesity. Luckily, it works the other way around. You can take a lean microbiome, a microbiome from a lean mouse, put it into an obese mouse, the obese mouse gets lean. There's one caveat, though. They have to continue eating the same sort of a diet, right? So when that obese mouse starts looking for more cheese and, the mouse version of junk food, we actually have diets that we can give. They're like McDonald's version mouse food. They have to continue eating that, but they're driven to eat it more, and they're more likely to metabolize it and store it as body fat, right? The lean mouse, in order to stay lean, has to eat more of the fruits and vegetables style mouse diet in order to maintain that over time. Okay, so there's part of its lifestyle, part of its actual, hard metabolic effects. Do you think this could ever happen in humans, or is it just like mice? Who cares? Yeah, there's a really famous case about 3 years ago. Female marathon runner. So the lean, the mouse version, the human version of a lean mouse, went in for, I think she went in for knee surgery. And while she was in the hospital, she got this really nasty intestinal infection called C. diff, Clostridium difficile. Nasty, right? You have to get rid of it with powerful antibiotics, which disrupts your microbiome even more. It's very resistant sometimes to full treatment, so it comes back and comes back and comes back. People die of it. 100,000 people every year die of this bacterial infection. And so what they do for it now, it has about a 95% cure rate, is what's called an FMT, a fecal microbiome transplant, which is basically this. You take the microbiome from a donor and you inoculate it to the sick person, and the sick person's infection goes away 95% of the time, right? It's the therapy of choice now for that particular infection. Unfortunately, this female marathon runner, within about 3 or 4 months, gained almost 30 pounds. Yeah, and it wasn't just because she was less active after her surgery. There was something changed metabolically. She was always hungry, she was always eating, she always wanted junk food. What do you guys think happened? Where do you think her donor came from? Her donor was not an obese mouse. Her donor was our cousin who was overweight. Right? So that shows us that kind of thing can happen in humans. There's all kinds of things that we can show, that we can transfer. So you can take the mouse version of an introvert and take their microbiome, put it into a mouse version of an extrovert, and the extrovert becomes an introvert, and vice versa. You can do an extrovert to introvert too. So like here you're taking, it's almost like a software change, right? Where you're taking one computer, like we're just the hardware, and we're taking out the software, the microbiome, and we're changing somebody from a Mac to a PC. I mean, that's basically what you're doing here, right? It's really, on one hand, it's somewhat scary, and on the other hand, it's like, oh my gosh, think of the cool things that we could do. Some of the microbiome conferences that I go to, we'll joke around about this kind of stuff, and you know, sometimes people will go, we're not the ones in charge here. The bacteria are controlling the show, right? They're telling us how we feel. They're telling us what we're hungry for. They're telling us, you know, what to seek out. There's some people who are, there are these kind of scientists called microbiome ecologists that talk about how our microbiome and our immune system is how we choose a mate. Like, that's how we choose our significant other, based on compatible microbiomes, right? So when you guys are sitting close enough together, right? Well, everybody is. Whoever's sitting next to you right now, you're exchanging bacterial clouds with the person next to you right now. So it's about a 3-foot window, right? So you know that personal space? Once you get inside that personal space, you're exchanging microbiome with the people next to you. And there's somehow, these this class of scientists, microbiome ecologists, feel that we can sometimes sense that at a subconscious level, like, this is not like where I'm getting a bad vibe from you. You know, like gut feelings, right? That idea is somehow that information is being transmitted and being sensed. So anyway, that's another aside that I didn't plan on going in right now. But so I show the mouse data. I talk theoretically about what's possible in humans. Here's an example of actual human data. So these are microbiome patterns from people with major depressive disorder in the red, or control, non-depressed people in the blue. And so you can see right now, without even looking at this stuff, with just looking at their overall pattern, you can see that they're different, right? There's a depressed microbiome and there's a non-depressed microbiome, and we can see different signatures in that. We can take that depressed microbiome from a human, put it into a mouse, and the mouse becomes depressed. Right, or the mouse version of depression. So, I mean, it shows us that these feelings that could potentially be performance enhancing can change. So, a lot of what's going on here is neurotransmitter changes. For decades and decades, we've been thinking that the neurotransmitters are only here. That's why I said earlier that it's not just a brain thing anymore, it really is a gut-brain thing. And if we want to get the maximum effect of our serotonin and our dopamine and our norepinephrine, which do all these things, not really in isolation, like I said earlier. They always work sort of in concert with each other. If we want to feel our best, and if we want to perform our best, we have to look at the gut first. And so some of it comes from diet, some of it comes from our stress or relaxed lifestyles. Here's an example here. So here's the microbiome producing these things: tryptophan, phenylalanine, tyrosine. The actual microbiome cells are going to produce those, release them into the intestine where the microbiome lives. They're going to be absorbed into the bloodstream, they're going to go into the brain, and then they're going to be used as precursors to make serotonin, and make tyrosine, and make dopamine, and make noradrenaline, right? So the fact that the microbiome is making these things on their own, but also making the precursors that are being used for the metabolism of those neurotransmitters. Where else do these come from? Tryptophan, phenylalanine, tyrosine. Food, right? They come from proteins and dairies and cheese and things like that. This is one of the reasons, like, tyrosine can be particularly high in certain cheeses, and that can make people some cheeses can make some people feel almost manic. Right, because of how they. It's almost like, where do I get that cheese? Like that's an example of how, like, little tiny changes can have big mental changes or big psychological outcomes. If we have a leaky gut, if we have too much inflammation, if we have a poor immune system, if we have a lot of stress, we're going to be in a situation like this, where what I just described doesn't work very well. So you're not able to generate the right kinds of signals, and so you feel down. And sort of compounding that, your leaky gut is allowing things to get across into your systemic circulation that shouldn't be across anyway. And so you feel down, and now you're having an inflammatory reaction. Now you're having an immune system overreaction that's going to make you feel bad in even other ways. Okay, so this is another aspect of changing the metabolism of the bacteria, but making sure they have a good home, so to speak, so that things aren't sort of leaking through. There's a lot of moving parts here. And it can go both ways. If you're healthy in both brains, one of the really cool things about it is that health in one brain or the other will be reflected to the other tissue. So if you have a good gut, it's going to send good signals to the brain. They get reflected back down to enhance that healthy gut. If you're out of balance in either of those, you're going to send continued imbalancing signals. So you could be stressed out, which can lead to leaky gut, which leads to you being more stressed out, which leads to more leaky gut, which leads to you being depressed, which leads to more leaky gut, which leads to you being burned out, etc., etc. It's the classic definition of a vicious cycle. We've known for a couple of years that if you can change the architecture of the gut, of the microbiome, change more good bacteria, less bad bacteria, that sends good signals to the brain, you feel better, right? We've known that for 5, 6, 7 years now, right? What we've known only about the last year is that now the good signals that go down from this brain back down to the second brain, those good signals can enhance the growth of the good bacteria. So you make it better, this gets better, the signals go down, make it even better. And then this, and then so you get out of that vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. So much so, we just learned this about 6 months ago, that you do that over time, the architecture here changes, the architecture here changes, meaning your neurons will actually start to wire in a different direction. So what you change in the microbiome, you actually change the structure of your brain. And that's great, because what we think we're on the verge of being able to do is unwire your bad habits and rewire your good habits in your brain. The advantage of that is that if we can do that from a gut perspective, this is very, very plastic. We can change this really, really quickly. Within about 3 days, we can change what's growing in your gut. If we can have somebody, and if that can make you feel better, you're probably going to keep doing the thing that we asked you to do, and that's going to make you feel more better, and that's going to change better. And then we can unwire those bad habits and rewire the good habits. Now we can change so you're not having to fight willpower to come to a place like this, right? You won't sit there in the afternoon and go, oh, I really don't feel like going to CrossFit today. You're going to be wired in a way that says, I go to CrossFit today, right? It's a something we can do by modulating the microbiome. So anyway, there's lots of ways we can do this. So, you know, one of the things that I'll get from my nutrition colleagues sometimes is a question like this. Well, can't I just get that from yogurt? What do you guys think?
No.
No? How come no?
Sugar.
Isn't yogurt good? Some of it is sugar. Yeah, that's the biggest problem with yogurt, right? How many people look at their yogurt labels? Yeah, 30 grams of sugar in some of those yogurts. That's like drinking a soda, right? So, you know, buy plain yogurt, put in your own honey or maple syrup or jelly or whatever you want to do. But probiotics can be good. We've known for 100 years, literally 100 years, people who eat more fermented foods do better. They have better microbiome, they have better gut integrity, they have better immune system function, they live longer, right? We knew the longevity piece of it 100 years ago. We couldn't measure microbiome back then, but I mean, these are good. Fermented foods are great. Probiotics, there's probiotics in yogurt, there's probiotics in kefir and kombucha and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Lovely, lovely, lovely. But what they're basically going to do is help change the environment in your gut. They're not going to change your microbiome. They're not going to, think of it as a garden, right, or a rainforest. You're not really going to change what grows in there in terms of the actual bacteria, but you'll change the environment in terms of the pH. So eating yogurt every day or any of these fermented foods, or eating the right fibers from asparagus or black beans or yogurt, oatmeal, those are going to help change the environment and give fuel to the bacteria that you're trying to grow. Eating the right kinds of phytobiotics, things like apples and grapes and dark chocolate and red wine. Everybody cheers when I say red wine. Hops from beer. You know, here we are in the state that makes the most microbrews of any state. All of those things are going to be sort of generally good for your microbiome, right? You're going to be giving the right pH, you're going to be lowering inflammation, you're going to be giving some of the raw material for the bacteria to make the compounds that we want. But if you want to get very targeted and very therapeutic, we can go the next level now. We can say, you know what, if you eat this fiber, it's going to improve your stress resilience because you're making more GABA, a neurotransmitter that helps us relax. We know that we can say if you give somebody this strain of probiotic bacteria, you're going to make more serotonin, which is going to make you less depressed, right? We're able to get to that level of specificity that these kinds of things are still good to do on a daily basis, but they're not going to get you to that level of therapeutic effect, if you will. Okay? So, and there's all kinds of other things that we can do. We can get enough sleep. We can be mindful. How about this? I want everyone to sit in your chair comfortably for just 1 second. And I want you to just get ready to take a nice deep breath. I want you to breathe in for a count of 4. Hold it for a count of 4. Breathe out for a count of 4. If you did that 4 or 5 times, right? Did that for a minute, you would lower cortisol. You would change signaling between your 2 brains immediately. Does that sound a little woo-woo to you guys? No? I'm in Colorado, so it doesn't sound woo-woo in California either. But in some places I talk, it does sound woo-woo. What you're doing there is that deep breathing is activating the vagus nerve, right? The vagus nerve is one of the main neuronal connections from your brain to your gut, right? So that's one example of where, Ayurvedic practitioners 5,000 years ago who were doing yoga and meditation, they had it right. They didn't know why they had it right, but they had it right. So we're able to look at those sort of traditional therapies and apply modern science to them now and say, aha, this is how they work. This is why they work. This is the mechanism behind them. So we know that things like this work mindfulness. We know physical activity like I talked about before. We know sleep can change. Sleep is a very unique stress on the body. How many people in here get 8 hours of sleep on a regular basis? Like 5 hands went up. Awesome. Good for you guys. How many people get 6? Yeah, that's usually the sweet spot. The best part of it was this, that the judges made a big deal about the fact that this is a brand new category, that the science has changed so much around the microbiome and the gut-brain axis that we're latching on that to use it to help people feel better and perform better, right? That's a whole new category that's going to be growing into the coming decades. So how do we do that? I'll tell you how we do that in a second. What do we get when somebody uses that, right? When you use all of that coordinated gut-brain axis system, what can you reasonably expect? So this is a study that we did. It was just accepted in a journal, Functional Foods and Health and Disease. Here's the title. Academic papers are always a lot of gobbledygook, but effective coordinated probiotic, prebiotic, phytobiotic supplementation on microbiome balance and psychological mood state in healthy stress subjects. So what we did was we got a group of chronically stressed humans. Do you think those people are hard to find in today's world? No, they're everywhere. The only difficulty was that we wanted to make sure that they didn't have depression, and they didn't have Prozac, and they didn't have antidepressants, right? So that was one of the screening things that we did. And we also made sure that they didn't have gut problems like irritable bowel or Crohn's or something like that. And the reason we did that is because there's already really good data on all of that. We already have really good data on this bacteria can help depression, and this fiber can help irritable bowel syndrome and things like that. We wanted to get into the middle of healthy stressed people, right? People who don't have problems, so to speak, and see what we could get. And what we got over the course of the supplementation, which was just one pack, one 30-day supply, microbiome changed significantly. So good bacteria went up. This composite score is an algorithm we use to take the inputs of good bacteria and the inputs of bad bacteria and the inputs of things like Akkermansia is one that's associated with your gut lining, so that's a signal of is your gut leaky or has good integrity. This one is this Firmicutes to Bacteroides ratio is a signal for what your metabolism is doing in terms of blood sugar control and fat storage and things like that. So it's good stuff, it's bad stuff, it's metabolism stuff. We put that all in, and overall, after 30 days, your microbiome was 17% better. 17% more diverse and resilient and ready to take on the stressful 21st century, right? That's all awesome. But I joke around with people all the time. I say, not a single person woke up on day 31 of the study and jumped out of bed and went, oh, my bifidobacterium feels awesome this morning, right? You can't feel that. If that changed, you might feel less gas or less bloating or even better digestion or something like that in the gut. But what we really care about, what you really feel, is that if your microbiome changes in a positive direction, you have better signaling through the gut-brain axis, more of the good signals, less of the bad signals, which results in you feeling differently. And this is why we measure mood state. And so what you're seeing here, technique we use called profile of mood states, all the negative mood states are down significantly. And then a positive mood state like vigor, that I defined at the beginning, the opposite of burnout, is up significantly. And so what this tells us is people felt better. But it tells us something even deeper, that because they all change, people feel a better overall well-being. They were feeling better in a very holistic way. It wasn't just that their fatigue was gone. It wasn't just that their mood was better. It wasn't just that they were less irritable or their brain fog was gone, right? It was all of that. And the reason we can get such a comprehensive effect like that is because of that natural pharmacy, like I talked about before. You're not just giving the one bacteria that helps you with serotonin. If you did that, you might have only seen a change on this marker. Or if we had given the bacteria that helps with GABA, which is the anti-tension neurotransmitter, we might have only seen a change here on this one. But the fact that we're doing all of it in this sort of comprehensive way, we're able to help people feel better in a comprehensive way. Does that make sense to everybody? So we presented this all around at different scientific conferences, and the way that we do it is by coming at it in a very holistic perspective. So each of these bacteria, Lactobacillus rhamnosus 11, Bifidobacterium longum 175, Lactobacillus helveticus 52, have been documented previously in prior clinical trials to help with depression, to help with stress, anxiety, and depression, right? So we know if we give you this one, you're going to feel better. If you give this one, you're going to feel better, all in different ways. So we decided to give all of them so you felt better in that comprehensive way. Does anybody in here take a probiotic? Can I, like a non-Amare probiotic?
No.
Can I pick on somebody? You want me to pick on him? So how did you pick your probiotic?
I've been hearing about on it, so I used on it.
Okay. Okay, so you heard about it and...
Well, I listened to this podcast.
Okay. That's a little more advanced than most people do to pick their probiotic product. Usually they go, a friend of mine told me about it, so I was going by CVS on the way home, and I went to the probiotic aisle, and I got the one that was on sale, you know? Or if they're a little more advanced, they'll pick it up and they'll look at it and they'll go, well, it had 5 billion. And then you look at the next one, and that one has 10 billion. Yeah, and the next one has 50 billion. Which one would you guys buy?
50.
50, because we're Americans. More is better, right? More sometimes can be worse. That's how most people do it. Most people don't even consider this, which is strain specificity. The idea that this Lactobacillus rhamnosus is a good example. This 11 is the one that lowers stress hormones, cortisol, and increases GABA. This is going to help you relax. This is going to help you sleep better if you have more GABA production on demand. If I gave you GABA right now, what do you think would happen?
I use it.
You use GABA itself?
Insomnia.
Okay, so a lot of people do that to help them fall asleep. It can make you drowsy. It can make you fall asleep. What if, instead, you could take this and get GABA when you needed it, but not when you don't need it, right? You might need it when your head is going like this at night before you go to bed. You might need it when you're sitting in traffic. You might need it, lots of times we might need it, right? But have it be produced on demand, that's one way to do that. But what if you left here and you said, yeah, he said something, Lactobacillus rhamnosus, something or other. And you went to the store, and lots of grocery stores in the country sell Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG is the strain. Anyone know what that one does? It's a really good one. I actually recommend it to people all the time. It's really good for traveler's diarrhea. And if that's not what you're looking for, and you buy it, you're going to get an effect, right? You're going to stock up if you don't have the diarrhea, right? So that idea of the benefit of the probiotic is very dependent on the strain. And so you have to look at CFUs. The strain
determines not just the benefit you're getting, the strain determines how many CFUs I need to give. So CFU stands for colony-forming units. It's kind of like the strength of the probiotic. And so these guys, all three of these added up, is only about 3 billion, right, that the clinical trials tell us. And so someone who will look at our bottles sometimes and go, 3 billion? That's not a lot. But if you're trying to get these effects, that's the exact amount that you need. There's no reason to take 30 billion or 100 billion. That might even be bad because it could upset the balance of what we're trying to do. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, so strain specificity is really important. So we know that those bacteria are going to deliver those effects. We also give you this. We give you these fibers. These specific fibers are prebiotic fibers. So I said before, the number one thing you can do is eat more fiber, but an even more targeted recommendation would be eat more prebiotic fibers. Because all fibers are good, but not all fibers are prebiotic. And prebiotic means that these are going to grow the kinds of bacteria that we want. So if we give you just the fiber, you're going to get benefits. This is one isomalto-oligosaccharide. This is one called a galacto-oligosaccharide. This is one called a galactomannan. If I just gave you GOS, biamino-GOS, we know that would improve your stress resilience. Not because of the fiber, but because the fiber is going to feed a bacteria that's going to produce compounds that are going to help with your stress resilience. Okay, so it's sort of step by step by step kind of a thing. This one, this biamino-GOS, and this sunfiber galactomannan, just in the last couple of months have been put into trials of people with autism, right? People with autism is kind of like it's a very classical gut-brain axis dysfunction, right? You've got behavioral problems, you've got irritability issues, you've got food intolerances, you almost always have microbiome disruptions, leaky gut, inflammation, immune system dysfunctions, all kinds of things. Each of these groups, this group in the UK, and this group in Japan, all they did with their intervention was give the fiber. And what they showed after 8 weeks was change in the microbiome, better gut integrity, lower inflammation, lower cytokines, better behavior, right? Better behavior from just giving people fiber, right? 10 years ago, that would have sounded absolutely ludicrous. And now, we can look at that and go, makes perfect sense, right? Because of what we know about the gut-brain axis and the microbiome. And then we make sure that we match them up, right? So this fiber feeds these bacteria. This fiber feeds this guy, this fiber feeds these guys. And so you can get an effect from the bacteria, you can get an effect from the fiber, and you can get a coordinated effect if you give them all at the same time. And then this last one is this idea of what we call phytobiotics. The idea that certain fruits and vegetables can be really, really good, and if we can target the phytonutrients that are in them, particularly flavonoids or polyphenols, we can give you an extract of apples, an extract of grape seeds, an extract of pine bark to work across the whole gut-brain axis. And we file patents around the globe around this kind of thing. So some of these are going to give direct neurotransmitter effects in the brain. Some of them are going to give effects in the gut to protect the good bacteria once you grow them. Some are going to help with inflammation and immune system response and things like that. I love to get this message out, but I want the message to be a little more nuanced than just eat more yogurt, or get a probiotic, or eat more fiber, right? Those are all lovely things that I do want everybody to do, but we're at a time now in 2019 where we can finally be very targeted and very precise. And the reason that what I just explained to you is different is because it's addressing each one of these levels of the gut-brain axis. I'll tell you one of the biggest problems that we have, whether we're talking to a general population or we're talking to an athletic population, if the athlete is overtrained or the non-athlete is burned out, we don't necessarily know. We know that they don't feel the way they want to, and we know they're not performing the way that they want to, right? Something's wrong. We don't always know what's wrong or where it's wrong. It could be the microbiome and all the reasons that I said before. It could be that they have leaky gut. It could be that they have too much inflammation there. It could be that their immune system is overactive or underactive. It could be that they have plenty of neurotransmitters, but they're not able to get to the receptor sites because they're being blocked by stress hormones, or they're being blocked by inflammation, or they're whatever. Or their neurotransmitters really are low. But we don't have very good tools to, in the moment, say to that overtrained athlete or that burned out individual, this is where your problem is. And the reason that's a problem is because the standard therapy has always been, oh, you're feeling sad? We'll give you Prozac. And that's only one piece. If your problem is really there, you're not going to get the effects that you're looking for, right? So that idea of a multifactorial problem needs a multifactorial solution, and this is how we're looking at it. And if we can just get people to move from wherever they are on this mental wellness continuum, even just one step to the right, that's a win for that person. I've been doing this kind of work for 20 years now, and it's the coolest thing to see somebody go from burnout to vigor, or from depression to feeling normal again, or feeling here. A lot of people here don't have any problems, but they just feel kind of blah. They feel, I'll go up to somebody and say, how you doing? And they'll go, I'm fine. And when I hear somebody say I'm fine, I'll often go, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. You're not supposed to feel fine. You're supposed to feel this. You're supposed to feel amazing. You're supposed to be living like a rock star, killing it every day. Whatever, I joke around about it a little bit, but this is where we're supposed to be. And if we can get you there, it's not going to happen overnight. I'm not trying to say to people here, if you have depression, take this probiotic, and you're going to be optimized the next day, right? It's a progressive process. But as you see somebody go from that state of burnout to vigor, everything changes. It's not just that they feel better, that individual, they do, but they feel so much better, it radiates out from them. So they're a better mom, or a better dad, or a better spouse, or a better worker, or a better friend, or a better teammate, or they feel so good they volunteer in their church or their school, or there's a very pro-social effect that rolls out from that is amazing, amazing, amazing to see. And it's not just about getting your energy back, and it's not just about your mood lifting or your brain fog. It's all of that. And I'll close with this really quick story. A couple of years ago, we did a program like this to get people to move up that mental wellness continuum. So we got people who were burned out, and we were trying to restore their vigor. And at the end, a lot of times in our classes, we'll have people meet every week, and they'll sort of share what they're going through. Like, this week I changed my diet, I'm feeling this much better, blah, blah, blah. They're at the end of our 8-week intervention. And people were sharing, this is what I got, this is how I feel. And one person got up and said, my brain fog is gone. And another person got up and said, my energy is back. And another person said, my mood. And a woman in the middle got up and she goes, yeah, my brain is better, and my mood and energy. And she didn't really have the words to say how she was feeling. She wasn't going to say, my vigor is improved, right? Because that's not how we talk. And she just didn't have the word for it. So she totally gave up. You can see that she just goes, I don't know. I just know I'm getting a lot more vacuuming done. And everyone laughed at her like that. She got really embarrassed and she kind of sat down. And I pointed her out. I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You feel so holistically better that it's not just that you're back and you want to do something with it. And when you see that in an athlete, it's amazing because then they go to the next level. When you see that with anybody else, you see them go to that next level, whatever that next level is for them. And that's what we're trying to do in a new way around this gut-brain axis. So I appreciate you guys being here tonight to listen to me. I'm going to hand it back over to Janelle, and she's going to talk about a couple of things, and I think give away some things too. So thanks a lot, you guys.
Andrew and James are going to pass out some tea so everyone can experience, maybe not tonight, unless you plan to be up for a while and want some extra energy, but the Energy Plus products. So we're going to pass one of those, so everyone can take one of those. And then I'll get the drawing set up. But first of all, we just wanted to thank, of course, CrossFit 970. Let's give them a round of applause. Wealth Management. He just volunteered. He's an amazing photographer and videographer, and he volunteered. So give Michael a round of applause. And we're going to thank the other leaders and above in the area. We're all in this together as a team, so we're so thankful that you're here. And the Luann Pulling Group and Jen Morris's group. And we're just really happy to be here with you guys just bringing value and experiencing this together. So, we are going to be doing our giveaway, and I'm going to break down the box and kind of go through that. So for our testimony folks to come out, we have 3 people that are going to share in about 2 minutes each, so it's going to be real quick. And we just wanted to bring even a different angle. So what we heard tonight, and as Shawn was sharing this, what does that look like in real life for some people that have been using your products for a little bit? How has that changed their lives? So I'm going to start with my good friend and maybe the leader on our team, Alyssa Markham. So if you want to share a little bit about your story.
So for me, when I was first introduced to Amare, I thought, oh, I'm really great because I can eat a whole row of Oreos and my stomach is great. Like, I don't have any indigestion. I thought stressed people were people who worked in an office and had that. I didn't think that moms really got stressed, or they had to be on the medication. Like, that was where that mental health issue was there. So when I was introduced to Amare, and maybe the people around me were like, oh my gosh, we need this so bad, but I was in denial. And as I started it, there was one thing in my life that I was like, if I could change this one thing, this would be what it would be. And I'm going to try and hold it together. But when it comes to mental health, it's a sensitive subject, right? So what would happen for me is on a far too regular basis is as I would get to the end of the day and the fuse on the bomb that we all kind of can be would get burned short and go off, I would absolutely lose it with my children. And it was terrible. We all know what it's like to yell at kids, hey, knock it off, don't do what you're doing. But this was one of those full-on losing control. I am so stressed out that the only way that I can manage it, and inappropriately so, is to scream at my children. And then they would become afraid of me. I would see the fear in their eyes, and I'm sure that instantly would switch from, I have no idea why mom is screaming at me, but I am scared of her right now, right? Like, such a horrible place to be. So that was the one thing that I thought, if I could get rid of that would be great. But as I talked to other people, it was kind of like, but that's normal, right? Like, we're all moms, we're all dads, like, this happens. Forgive yourself and move on. And so I find myself doing that. Okay, tomorrow, I'm going to do better. I'm going to be better. I'm going to be the adult in the relationship, right? So that didn't happen. I would fail often, and it was really frustrating. So then I started on Amare, and within 2 weeks, that fuse burned down to the bomb, right? But instead of going off, I paused, and I didn't lose it. And I was like, well, this is something. Like, this might actually be something. And so I shouted Amare from the rooftops. I mean, I told everybody about it. And I lost it with my children later that week. And I thought, oh crap. Like, I told these people about it, people are ordering. What have I done? Have I led them astray? And the beautiful thing is I noticed over time, the number of times that I lost it got further and further apart. And as I was reflecting back with my husband, I have not lost it with my children in 6 months. When Dr. Talbott talks about how it spreads into your life, this is what's so cool. My relationship with my husband is so much better. In fact, he was the one when we joke about, like, Riley's working, he's like, yeah. They're working. My relationship with my children is so much better. There's no more fear there. They can come to me and I'm a safe place, which is what parents should be for their children. My energy is up. I'm getting PRs at the CrossFit gym. I laugh so much more. And that makes all the difference in someone's life. So that's my story. There's so much more to it, but that's just my one little nugget. And so if you guys can have just even that little piece of it, of being on this, being consistent for several months, oh, it's such a fun place to be. So thanks.
Hi everybody, my name is Sandra Wonkelman, and I've actually been with Amare for, I think, going on about 9 months now. And Amare actually came into my family's life at a very, very critical time. One of my best friends actually introduced me to it. And during this time, my husband at the time was actually disability discharged from the Army. He was an Apache pilot, and as he was going through a lot of things he didn't understand, PTSD, a bunch of different therapies, exposure therapy, you name it, he went through it. The result of that was being placed on a lot of psychotropic medications. That ultimately, over a period of time, we could see the changes for him, very negative side effects. That ultimately led to a peak of one night Thanksgiving and attempted suicide. So at that point, as you can imagine, there was a massive impact on him, on our family, and a lot needed to change. At that point as well, during this process, I myself started leaning on alcohol a bit too much. So we knew that something needed to change. So as a family, we hit the books, did a lot of research, from videos to purchasing books. I have a whole new case of all these books we studied about the brain, the gut, all these things. Just really trying to find a way forward. And when Amare came into my life, it was like that piece of a 10,000, jigsaw puzzle that was missing. And I got on, he also got on, and it just was such a huge transitional phase in our lives that we weren't expecting. So over the course of the last several months, he was able to actually fully get off all of his medication and transition and completely stabilize with a completely different way of life moving forward. For me, it's really interesting because going through a high stress time, you don't really know when you're, fight or flight, what you're doing. And when I was taking everything, I didn't quite realize not only, of course, I needed to get out of those stressful situations, and there's a lot of healing and things that needed to happen moving forward. What I came to realize was, long before any of that stuff took place, I was one of those people that thought this is just kind of normal. This is how it is. A lot of people go through this. When you kind of have that suffering and silence inside, that a lot of people you realize are also suffering. And to really see that, okay, once that stress was gone, that my life before that was really not how I wanted to continue to live either. So for the last several months, it's just been a progression, and really, we feel like we're almost just getting started. I feel like I'm just getting started, where everything is continuing to change. Every day that I take the fundamentals, or the energy, or the mood, that my body is just continuing to heal, and I have more stamina, I have more vigor. I want to get my diet on track, I want to get to the gym. Things that before I just had no energy for, and also just a mentality inside that I didn't realize didn't need to be there. Depression, anxiety, things like that. So it has been an absolute blessing in our lives, and we are just our own walking testimonies for it. And I just know that it's only going to get better from here. So.
And Justina and John are going to come up and share. And you guys, some of you, again, might be your first time at an Amare event like this, an educational fun event. But you guys know that you have the chance of kind of experiencing the products, or you can do what's called be a wellness partner, just join the mission. And so if you hear that terminology, just want you guys to know about that. You can be a preferred customer, you can always buy at retail, but most people become a preferred customer if they're going to be buying things regularly. And then the wellness partner is just, again, being part of the movement, saying, this resonates with me, and I want to help take this message to the world. So we're going to hear a little bit about both of those experiences from this couple.
My name is Justina Gonzalez. I'm a holistic fitness coach and a mom of an almost 2-year-old. I'm 15. And I went through a really scary time of postpartum depression about 18 months ago. And I was doing all the things to be healthy. Obviously, that's my job. It's working out, eating clean, getting as much sleep as possible with a baby, meditating. But I just knew that there was something off inside of me. And there was one day that I found myself in a panic attack on the bathroom floor when my newborn was sleeping, and I was just praying that there was something that would help me feel better. And I wasn't expecting to cry, but this is what women do. So I went to the doctor, got my blood work done, and everything came back normal, right? My thyroid was normal. Like, I was losing weight. I was less than 100 pounds. My hair was falling out. I looked ill. I wasn't confident coaching because I felt like I looked sick. I know that I didn't feel good, and I knew that I was missing something really important to help other women. And when I talked about it with new moms in my breastfeeding support group, everybody said it was normal. So I kind of just let that be my story for a while. And then I found out about Amare, and it changed my life. Honestly, it was just a couple short weeks. I woke up and, within a couple short days, felt completely better. I had already started doing research on the gut, and I knew that it was really important. I had no idea how important and how much it impacted mental wellness. And I didn't realize how important your mental wellness was for your fitness goals. So at that point, I knew for sure, hands down, that I needed to introduce this to my clients. And that's when I decided to join the mission. And after meeting our leaders, like Dr. Shawn, I get to work with him, which is awesome. I get to work with Janelle, and I get to pick the people I work with and get to help women that are going through the things that I went through. And it feels good knowing that I can help my clients increase their stress resiliency the other 23 hours of the day that they're not with me. Because ultimately, I can't help them if they're in a bad relationship, or they're unhappy at work, or they have to sit in traffic, right? There's stress all the time. So I feel really good knowing that I can help my clients like 24/7. And it just boosts my business. And I get referrals and, higher clients coming back. But I just know that the products worked because what they've done for me and what you just heard from the other two ladies. So.
It's crazy to think about. You don't realize how low you are until you experience your high. And that was kind of my situation. I didn't realize how low I was, and when I look back at it, I realized that I was in denial. My story, I was 230 pounds at my heaviest. After our son was born, I was, this was almost 2 years ago, 190 pounds, not too long ago. And my whole life I've been dealing with weight issues, just up and down. And I could never find something that was sustainable. And now, after taking Amare for a year, almost a year and a half, I've lost that 30 pounds. I feel like I've finally found something that has been sustainable. There were times that, I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to wake up. I'm sure I wasn't enjoyable to be around. And it feels really good to just finally feel like I have found something sustainable and able to keep the weight off. And I'm in the fitness world as well, so I wasn't practicing what I was preaching. And like she said, you lose confidence. It's a horrible feeling when you're trying to be somebody you're not. So, after really just focusing on gut health, it's just amazing to finally feel like I have control of my life. And, I have to be there for our son, for our family, for her, and it just feels good to feel like I'm in control.
Say one more thing about the business because I didn't touch on this. Obviously, it's a business and you make money in it, and it's transformed our lives. As an entrepreneur, you know that you're always trying to grind and get the next client in the door, making sure that you can pay your bills. And Amare offers an income guarantee, a monthly income guarantee once you hit a certain range. And when that happened for us, it was December, which is a really stressful time of year financially. And I remember kind of being upset that we weren't going to be able to give our son the Christmas that I thought he should have, until I remembered that I was getting this $1,000 guarantee. And it's not just that, but it takes off the stress from our life in our relationship. It just helps us have more fun and live freely. And financial stress is the #1 stress in our country. I think. I could make that up. I don't know. I feel like it is. So it's been amazing. Just not only do the products work, but the company is awesome. The money's there, and our leadership is one of a kind. So I'm happy you guys are here. Listening to all that.
We will definitely be done here at 9. And so let's see. We are going to do a drawing here. So if the Markham couple could come on up and help me out here. Raise your hand if you guys do CrossFit or anybody CrossFit. Raise your hand. Yeah. All right. Or if you just feel real good about doing some pull-ups and want to have some fun. One of our drawings would just be for fun, like little pull competition. So if anybody wants to do that, start moseying your way over here. It's all for fun and just for maybe some good pictures. I don't know. So we did not speak specifically tonight. So if you would like to come over and do, show off a little bit, it's okay. cheer you on. Come on over here. If not, we'll just let Shane and Melissa do it, and Dr. Shawn and Julie. But we're gonna go through and have the individual products from the B3 pack, which includes the fundamentals pack in here. And so this is a program that, if you're not familiar with B3, you say, what is that? It's for the body, the biome or microbiome, and the brain. So it's addressing all of those. And as far as, yeah, there you go. Thank you.